World Health Organization named South America the new epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic this Friday as the number of cases skyrocketed in Brazil. The Caribbean community has sent an election observation mission to monitor the general elections to be held in Suriname on Monday. 611 members of the security forces in South Africa have tested positive for the coronavirus. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. The World Health Organization named South America the new epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic in its Friday report as the number of cases skyrocketed in Brazil. Brazil has now reported over 330,000 cases, the second highest total in the world behind the United States. Speaking at a briefing, WHO Emergencies Programme Executive Director Mike Ryan noted that many South American countries have reported increasing numbers of cases. In addition to Brazil, other countries in the region such as Peru, Chile and Ecuador have also sparked concern due to their rapidly increasing infection rates. Peru has reported over 111,000 cases, Chile over 61,000 and Ecuador over 35,000 cases. Local media in Brazil have published a video shown by the Supreme Court of a ministerial meeting in which President Jair Bolsonaro clearly states his intention of interfering with the federal police to protect his family.
Já tentei trocar gente da segurança nossa no Janeiro oficialmente e não consegui.
I already tried to change security people in Rio de Janeiro and I didn't manage it. Enough is enough. I'm not going to wait for my entire family of my friends to be screwed just because I can't change someone in security. At the front line that belongs to our structure, it's going to change.
Bolivia's Senate President Eva Copa this Friday denounced that the armed forces entered the legislature and gave lawmakers a week-long ultimatum to ratify military promotions. The Bolivian Senate, led by the Movement Towards Socialism Party, highlighted that it would not submit to pressure from either the military or the de facto government led by Janine Áñez. Copa stressed that if the promotions are carried out by means of a supreme decree, as has been threatened, the dictatorial nature of the de facto government would only be further confirmed. Meanwhile, former President Evo Morales denounced the unprecedented move on Twitter and stressed that it was highly worrying that a commander-in-chief of the armed forces show up in uniform to impose deadlines on the Legislative Assembly.
As an institution, we will wait until next week for the Assembly to pronounce itself and approve or, ratify promotions of the armed forces. If we receive a negative response, we will proceed as established by our rules and regulations and supported by the organic law of the state's armed forces, the body that approves the promotion. It is the High Command of the Armed Forces. We will not work under threats or ultimatums. This assembly is a democratically elected assembly by the Bolivian people, and what this assembly is going to do is enforce this constitution.
The de facto government of Bolivia has admitted irregularities in the purchase of 170 overpriced ventilators. The foreign minister, who was involved in the process, has claimed that her deputy ministers and officials hid relevant information from her. Our correspondent, Freddy Morales, has the details.
The Minister of Justice admitted irregularities in the purchase process of 170 ventilators that, according to various calculations, were acquired at a surcharge of 300%, from $7,000 to $28,000 per unit. Two lawyers who noticed the irregularities were dismissed.
At one point, she refused to sign this contract, and if the other lawyer made observations on the procurement process, at least they should have stopped the procurement process, review it, and if appropriate, cancel the whole process.
It's not just the overpricing. The equipment is also inefficient for the intensive care units treating patients who are infected with the novel coronavirus. The Minister of Health and 4 other officials were the first to be charged and arrested.
We have requested, as the Ministry of Justice and as we began this investigation, the preventive detention of all those apprehended, taking into account the risk of obstruction and the risk of flight they pose.
Foreign Minister Karen Larry confirmed the authenticity of a report sent to her by the Bolivian consul in Barcelona, which warned of the failure of the purchase, because there was another offer of the same equipment but at half the price. The minister claims that her deputy ministers hid this document from her, which she only found out about through social networks.
The officials in charge of the distribution of notes, instead of passing it to my office because it was a report addressed to me, passed it on to the 3 deputy ministers. There is administrative negligence that has been penalized. I cannot take direct responsibility for that. I have acted accordingly as foreign minister by sanctioning these people.
The purchase was made in the record time of 1 week. The ventilators do not have the basics to be used for transferring patients in emergency situations. The Spanish company that manufactures the equipment has expressed willingness to negotiate the sale of the missing accessories.
Freddy Morales, Telesur, Bolivia.
A multidisciplinary Cuban team is designing emergency ventilators and producing personal protective equipment in order to support the country in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic and the limitations imposed by the US blockade. From Havana, our correspondent Nayara Tardo brings us the details.
The Cuban Neuroscience Center is using its knowledge, personnel and logistics to support the country in the fight against COVID-19.
What we did was redirect the technology we have to contribute to the fight against COVID-19. And our activity was basically concentrated in 3 areas. The first is the development of an emergency ventilator to have a reserve in case equipment was needed to provide respiratory assistance in intensive care units because there were not enough machines, which luckily has not occurred.
Cuban authorities have informed that the island has not been able to obtain ventilators from several of its usual suppliers, since 2 manufacturers of this medical equipment were acquired by an US firm. Now, ventilators are being designed and produced in Cuba as an alternative to these limitations.
Among the applications we included in the ventilator was a cell phone application so the doctor can monitor all the functions and alarms of the ventilator from anywhere with no need for an internet connection. Thus, the doctor can intervene remotely in case of any kind of emergency or incident that may arise.
More than 18 types of parts are also made here to fix any breakages of these ventilators. These are necessary resources for the optimal operation of these devices and are currently limited, since countries across the world require them and their governments are limiting their exportation.
Currently, if you're lucky enough to get someone to sell it to you, the patient circuit kit has a cost of approximately $300. Here, we are guaranteeing technological independence in the first place and also our sovereignty. We're making them in the country with the resources we have at hand, and the cost does not exceed $150. It is our contribution from our workplace to combat this pandemic. Given that the country really needs it, we set ourselves the task to develop and design the connectors for the patient circuit and at the same time to make them in our 3D printing machines.
More than 12,000 face shields distributed by health institutions throughout the country have also been made here. A joint effort alongside other scientific centers, national industry and self-employed workers. Some provide raw materials and others provide advice and work organization. Among the new projects is the development of devices to help in the molecular diagnosis of the virus and the design of a new non-invasive ventilation in collaboration with the University of London.
More stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In response to a request from the government of the Republic of Suriname, the Caribbean community sent an election observation mission to monitor the general elections to be held on Monday. The four-member mission, which arrived in Suriname on May 18th, is headed by Dora James, Supervisor of Elections of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. James has served as a member of Caricom election observation missions on other occasions. The Caricom mission is scheduled to meet with electoral officials, leaders of political parties and other stakeholders of the Republic of Suriname, and will monitor the electoral process, including the opening of polls, the voting process and the counting of ballots. Election observation serves as a platform for Caricom to support existing democratic traditions within the Caribbean community as part of its wider policy of supporting democracy and good governance. This Friday, Venezuelan Vice President of Communications Jorge Rodriguez provided information on the 62 new coronavirus cases identified in the country. Of the new cases, 8 were locally transmitted, while the others were imported cases or people who had contact with others who had travelled abroad. Rodriguez also informed that 79% of cases identified in the country are imported, as Venezuelan nationals returning from neighbouring countries. 47,000 Venezuelan migrants have now returned to the country. Venezuela has reported a total of 882 cases and 10 COVID-19 deaths. According to the Venezuelan government, Colombia serves as an operations centre for mercenaries and the organising of terrorist plots against the government of Nicolas Maduro. More details in the following report.
Venezuela has detained more than 60 mercenaries who were involved in an attempted incursion in the country.
We met with Captain Antonio Sequea in the city of Bogota, and he proposed a military operation that was being organized by the U.S. government, led by President Donald Trump.
Testimony provided by the mercenaries point to having been trained by paramilitary groups in Colombia's Riohacha and Guajira regions.
To meet Venezuelans in Colombia, train them, and come with them to Venezuela to secure Caracas and secure an airport here.
En territorio de Colombia para agredir.
Since September 2019, Venezuela has publicly denounced the existence of these paramilitary camps, revealing their locations and exposing the link between those behind the plots and Colombian drug traffickers.
Armed groups are being trained in northern Colombia, joining forces with drug traffickers, the same illicit business the Colombian government allegedly battles, the same traffickers that the DEA is pursuing under the many operations announced by President Donald Trump. Well, it seems their plans have not only failed to hurt drug traffickers, but have actually strengthened powerful criminal gangs that control northern Colombia.
It took 8 months for the Colombian government to respond, although they only addressed those who leaked the information.
We're doubling down on mechanisms within the public institutions to identify any wrongdoing by public servants who may be working for dictatorial regimes in the region.
For Caracas, this confirms Colombia's involvement in Operation Gideon. Their plan commenced when they called on Venezuelan soldiers to desert the military over a year ago.
What you are doing will undoubtedly generate a domino effect in your country. What you are doing is very brave.
That same day, opposition figure Juan Guaido congratulated the deserters that would supposedly fill the ranks of an armed invasion into Venezuela.
Congratulations for standing by the Constitution.
This former Venezuelan soldier had publicly deserted the military hours before driving an armored truck through a border crossing, running over at least 2 people. He is one of the mercenaries captured during the foiling of Operation Gideon.
The unemployment rate in the US state of California has risen sharply since the outbreak of the novel coronavirus epidemic. The total number of COVID-19 cases reported in California stands at more than 88,000, while the state has seen over 3,000 deaths and more than 17,000 recoveries. Meanwhile, the Employment Development Department of California State registered the largest increase in the unemployment rate since 1976 in March, rising 1.4% to 5.3%. More than 20,000 people have lost their jobs and many small businesses have ceased activities. Meanwhile, reports have indicated that the aid provided by the local government to cover salaries has been insufficient to cover all COVID-19 related expenses. Spanish authorities have announced they will lift some of the lockdown restrictions in the capital, Madrid, and the city of Barcelona from Monday. The Madrid Regional Health Department noted in a report on Friday that the rate of coronavirus infections in the region has slowed. Spain started phasing out one of Europe's toughest lockdowns earlier this month, but full restrictions had remained in both Madrid and Barcelona as they were the areas hardest hit by the COVID-19. According to the report, the loosening of the restrictions in Madrid and Barcelona means that all of Spain is now in at least the first phase of the lockdown exit plan. Spain has reported over 281,000 coronavirus cases, while COVID-19 has claimed over 28,000 lives in the country. Russia's Deputy Prime Minister warned on Friday that the country is expected to register a spike in the mortality rate for the month of May. Tatiana Golikova highlighted that despite the best efforts by doctors in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, the overall mortality rate in the country was set to climb sharply. Her statements came during a government meeting with President Vladimir Putin and healthcare professionals. Russia registered 150 COVID-19 deaths on Friday, its highest daily rate to date. Russian health authorities have now reported more than 3,200 deaths and over 326,000 coronavirus cases, the third highest number in the world after the United States and Brazil. Chinese officials have decided not to establish a specific growth target for the current year, but focus on stabilising employment and ensuring living standards. The decision was approved in the face of the great uncertainty stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic and its global economic impact, as mentioned in the report presented to the third plenary session of the 13th National People's Congress on Friday. China's central government is planning to assign more than $7 billion to employment subsidies and to create more than 9 million new urban jobs this year. Instead of focusing on GDP growth, the Chinese parliament set out other targets, such as ensuring personal income growth was in line with economic growth and eliminating poverty among all rural residents.
People are the foundation and lifeblood of the Communist Party of China. We remain unwavering and adherent to the people-centered development philosophy, no matter how big challenges and pressure we face and no matter how big sacrifices and costs we make. People are above everything else, and life is above everything else. We protect people's life and health at all costs.
And we're taking one final break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. 611 members of the security forces in South Africa have tested positive for the coronavirus, while 6 have died. Police Minister Beke Liseli informed on Friday that the COVID-19 national and provincial steering committees are in place and that the health protocols have been strictly followed. The minister stressed that measures such as intensive screening and testing have seen hundreds of members of the security forces put into isolation and over 3,000 have been quarantined. South Africa remains the worst hit nation on the continent, with more than 20,000 COVID-19 cases and almost 400 fatalities. Nigerian Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has formed a committee to address the reopening of the economy. In a statement, the Vice President noted that members of the National Economic Council are drawing up a resolution to ensure more effective collaboration between the federal and sub-national levels of government, especially regarding matters relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Vice President added that the resolution will include how to effectively and efficiently reopen the Nigerian economy after the lockdown imposed across the country. Osinbajo also disclosed that the committee will ensure more effective coordination between the federal government's presidential task force and the states of the federation. Nigeria has reported over 7,000 COVID-19 cases and more than 200 fatalities. Rwanda's tea sector has been spared by the coronavirus pandemic and saw a marked increase during the first quarter of this year. With over 9,000 tonnes produced and revenue of more than $27.6 million, the sector is up by 15% compared to the same period in 2019. Natawari, communications officer at Rwanda's National Agriculture Export Development Board, reported that the expansion of tea plantations and the improved prices on the international market have helped boost the country's tea exports. Tea was introduced in Rwanda in 1952. The fertile volcanic soil and temperate climate make for perfect tea growing conditions. The majority of the tea is cultivated on large plantations, with a small contribution from tea cooperatives and private growers.
An installed capacity of 2,800 megawatts
Chinese military engineers engaged in peacekeeping operations in the Democratic Republic of the Congo completed the construction of an emergency isolation centre on Thursday aimed at controlling the spread of the coronavirus. The isolation centre is inspected by the engineering department of the UN stabilisation mission in the country. The hospital, located in Bukavu, the capital of South Kivu province, will mainly be used to provide treatment to critically ill COVID-19 patients. The Democratic Republic of Congo is one of the worst hit countries in Central Africa, reporting nearly 2,000 cases and 63 fatalities. At least 6 people were killed and several homes destroyed by floods in Uganda's Kasese district on Thursday. According to police spokesperson Pauline Namayi, 2 rivers burst their banks and caused widespread destruction on either side of the border between Uganda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The official reported that several people, including 2 pregnant women, were rescued and are receiving treatment. According to reports, another river also overflowed following torrential rains in the Rwenzori mountain range area. Earlier this month, floods killed 4 people and displaced 5,000 in western Uganda. Neighbouring countries such as Rwanda and Kenya have reported more than 100 deaths due to recent floods and landslides.
4 rivers are originating from one source from the hills, and they were all flooded all together. Starting from River Lubiriha, River Nyamwasana, here we have Nyamwamba, we have Muvuko, and on the other side of Mount Rwenzori, we have Lamia River, which also misbehaved the way this one did.
I had just bought a plot. The flood came and washed away my property, cupboards, mattresses. Right now we are here trying to see what things of ours we can dig out. Right now we are trying to find the remaining items that could have been buried in our house.
Iran's supreme leader stressed in a speech on Friday that fighting for the liberation of Palestine is an Islamic duty. In his speech, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei condemned Western governments and some Arab countries for their support for Israel. The address marked International Quds Day, an occasion to express support for Palestine, and came after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused Iran of targeting Israel in cyber attacks. Khamenei recalled that the policy of normalizing the presence of the Zionist regime of Israel was one of the major US policies to back its main ally in the Middle East. The Supreme Leader also called on the international community to support Palestine in its struggle for liberation from Israeli occupation and for recognition of the State of Palestine.
The aim of this struggle is the liberation of the entire Palestinian land and the return of all Palestinians to their country. Some Arab governments in the region, which play the role of US puppets, have provided the necessary preconditions for this normalization, such as economic ties and the like. These efforts are completely fruitless and sterile.
A plane carrying 99 people crashed in a crowded Pakistani neighbourhood this Friday. Authorities have reported at least 45 casualties. The Airbus A320, operated by Pakistan International Airlines, crashed in a residential area near the Karachi airport with 91 passengers and 8 crew members on board. A provincial minister reported that at least 2 people had survived the crash. Prime Minister of Pakistan Imran Khan expressed condolences to the relatives of the deceased on Twitter and ordered an investigation into the incident. The accident came after commercial flights had begun to operate following the easing of the COVID-19 lockdown in Pakistan. And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.